A middle school student home alone has a terrifying encounter. And then we travel to the Soviet Union to take a look at a World War II era story involving a young woman working at a military factory. A portion of this factory is considered off limits. Experimental weaponry is being developed there. But curiosity gets the best of her, so she decides to take a peek. What she sees may be a grim reminder of the true power of our alien adversaries. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio.
I'm freaked out. Actually, I'm a lot freaked out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. Hope you guys are having a great day too. I hope you guys are having fun doing whatever you're doing. We got a lot of stuff to cover today. So first off, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command to give it up for one of our legacy Patreon supporters, Charlotte Renee. Woohoo! Yeah, she's walking on in, dancing on into Dead Rabbit Radio Command, doing a little boogie, doing a little dance for us. Charlotte Renee, you're going to be our captain or pilot in this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially, I totally understand. I really do. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. That is how you can help the show grow. Charlotte, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the Jason Jalopy. Everyone climb on board this rickety old Chitty Chitty Bang Bang car. I don't even know if anyone gets that reference. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that movie, came out in the 60s? What's a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang car? Everyone hop on board the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang car. Charlotte Renee fired this bad boy up. We're leaving behind Dead Rabbit Radio Command. Why don't you drive us all the way out to a seemingly ordinary house in a seemingly normal neighborhood. As we're going down there, I want to give another shout out. We're gearing up for this. Port Gamble Ghost Conference in Port Gamble, Washington, November 8th through the 10th. I will be speaking. I'll be doing a live presentation there. This will be my second year going there. I'm really looking forward to it. Port Gamble Ghost Conference in Port Gamble, Washington, November 8th through the 10th. For more information, go to portgamble.com. Charlotte Renee, we're headed all the way out to this seemingly ordinary house. We're about to meet a young man. He's a middle school student when this story takes place. Let's call him Bruno. Bruno wakes up in the morning and just lays there in bed for a moment because guess what? It's summer. He's got nothing to do. He's a middle school student. He doesn't have a job, doesn't have to go to school. There's a whole day of a lot of nothingness in store for Bruno, and he couldn't be happier. But he's laying there in bed and he hears his mother call out to him from her bedroom. Bruno! Okay, I guess Mom wants me for something. I'm not doing anything. No matter what she has planned. She's like, you want to go on a museum trip? Nope. I'm not doing anything educational. Bruno gets out of bed, leaves his bedroom, walks to his parents' bedroom, walks in, and it's empty. Mom? Mom, are you in here? He's kind of looking around. Doesn't see her. Whatever. Maybe she called for me and then went downstairs. Maybe she's outside getting the mail. Doesn't matter. I'm going back to my room. So Bruno's back in his room. He starts getting dressed. And then he hears his mother call for him again. Once again, he can tell, because, his mother has probably yelled to him multiple times from her bedroom to his. He knows where it's coming from. He knows exactly where the sound is coming from. But this time, Bruno! Mom, what? I'm getting dressed. Here, hold on. So he gets dressed, leaves his bedroom, walks to his mother's bedroom. There's nobody there. What the hell is going on? Mom? He goes to his sister's bedroom. No one's there. He walks downstairs, looks around the living room, looks into the kitchen. No one else is home but him. And he starts to think, maybe I'm just like that tired. A long day yesterday of doing nothing. Maybe I'm just tired. Like, that's the only thing I can think of. Bruno goes, maybe I'm just real sleepy. I'm confused. And I'm just like dreaming or, I don't know, something. But he can't figure out what's going on. He walks back upstairs. He goes to his room. He's in there for a few moments when he hears his mother call out for him again. But this time, even though the voice is still coming from where her bedroom is, he can tell where it's at. This time, there's anger behind the voice. Bruno! And he's sitting there, and he realizes he's alone in the house. He checked everywhere. This is the third time his mother's called for him. She's not where the voice is coming from, but even barring that, he's looked everywhere else. He's the only one in the house. When the mother calls out for him the third time and the voice sounds angry, now he's starting to get scared. He's in his bedroom and he has goosebumps. And he just sits there quietly. And he can hear the silence. The whole house is just quiet. Bruno's sitting there and he's waiting to hear the sound of footsteps walking down the hallway. He's straining his ears to see if he can hear anything like someone walking down the hallway. Maybe this is an elaborate prank. Maybe he can hear his mother giggle. Although that would actually be more creepy. Ring around the rosies. That's your favorite nursery rhyme, isn't it, Bruno? But he's sitting there and it's so quiet and he's trying to hear through the silence to see if he can detect anything other than himself in this house. But there's nothing. And for a minute or two, he's sitting there and he's just wondering what could possibly be going on. He clearly heard the voice 3 times. This is not a thing of him being awake or drowsy or anything like that. He's checked everywhere. He's heard the voice. He's alone. What is going on? But after a minute or two of just sitting there trying to hear something, he feels a change in the atmosphere. He said everything just seemed to shift. Something was different now. Something was different than it was before. And he could mark that moment. He felt everything around him kind of change. Bruno? He hears. His name in the form of a question. Bruno? But this time it was not the voice of his mother calling from her bedroom. It was the voice of his father. His father called out to him in the form of a question. Bruno? Bruno's sitting there in his bedroom and his whole body is shaking. Tears are streaming down his face. And he's desperately trying to keep his sobbing quiet. He's openly weeping, but he's trying to be as quiet as possible because Bruno's father died 4 years ago. Bruno said he was so terrified by this whole experience, but especially that last voice. You can no longer chalk this up to a practical joke or a mistake. Maybe the mom's calling for him and goes into the bathroom when he goes in to check. You could excuse a lot of the previous ones. But when he clearly heard the sound of his father's voice, who had been dead for 4 years, call out to him from somewhere in the house, for Bruno, it was no longer about being a skeptic or to try to figure out what was going on. For Bruno, it was now a matter of survival. Bruno was so terrified at this point, he actually crawled out his bedroom window, which meant, remember, he had to go downstairs. He's on the second floor of a house. He said that from his second floor window, he was able to safely navigate out of the house, which I'm sure he's probably done before, right? Or maybe he's like, well, I guess we're going to figure out if this will work. Or I guess we're going to figure out how much force 2 middle school ankles can take as they hit the ground. No, he got out of his window and he ran to his friend's house, which was nearby, sobbing, weeping, terrified about what he had just experienced. So it's been years since this story has happened. And he said, to this day, he doesn't really know what it was. He can't figure out exactly what he experienced that day. But he's never had anything like that happen since, or before that either. It was a single moment in time, a bizarre mystery, a terrifying event that happened once and never again. It's possible he just moved into his friend's house. He's like, hey, I'm not going back home. Hope you want to have a brother. He said, I never experienced anything like that before or since. I found the story online. It was posted. Okay, here's the thing, right? So, it was posted on Reddit. I looked through people's posting history to see if they tell a bunch of crazy stories, and if they do, I just disregard it. Because I come across that every so often. It happens a lot less than you would think. This story is pretty scary. You know, it could easily be like a creepy short story. I looked through his posting history, and he posts about normal stuff. Phones that he wants to buy, or piercings that he wants to get, or whatever. His username is... You're like, oh man, you wasted my... No, here's the thing. I think the story's true. But you're not doing me any favors when your username is Nipple Muncher. Oh, that's not the end. You're like, oh, that's a pretty ridiculous name. Nipple Muncher? So no, we're not done. Nipple Muncher 42069. It does look like right now he's living in Canada. So, I mean, you know, it's a pretty small country, right? I'm sure you guys can figure out where this story took place. When you look through his other posts, he's just talks about normal stuff. Here's some stuff on the upcoming election. Here's a question about the video game Bayonetta. Here's something called Accidental Renaissance subreddit. Am I going to regret this? Oh yeah, it's just pictures of people looking tired. Weird. But anyway, so he talks about normal stuff, and out of a normal life of Nipple Muncher 42069, he has this one event that is absolutely terrifying. Because what is it? That's a question we ask a lot on this show, but I think it's an important question to ask. Because this is one of those stories that really kind of doesn't fit in a lot of paranormal areas. Is it ghosts? Well, the father's voice definitely does make you think it is a ghost, and it could be. But why was the mother calling for him 3 times first? Now, is it a mimic story? Because we covered those on this show, and like I said on yesterday's episode, mimic stories are becoming a lot more prevalent in the paranormal world. Black-eyed kid stories became popular, and then we started seeing a bunch of black-eyed kids stories. So sometimes it is people hearing a cool story and then making one up involving them because they want to be a part of it. But the black-eyed kid stories are usually pretty dynamic. It's little kids with pitch black eyes, like no white stuff. What is that called? The iris? The white stuff? Anyway, that's not the iris, but the white stuff. Whatever it's called. They're staring at you. They're staring at you with pitch black eyes. Let us in. Let us in. We just need to use your phone. And you're like, no, I won't let you in. It's always this kind of like battle between good and evil. I think a lot of those stories are made up. honestly. I think a lot of black-eyed kid stories are made up. I don't think all of them are. I do find this very interesting. The same reason why I think it's interesting that now that everyone has a camera in their pocket, I mentioned this like on episode 50 of the podcast, is like really, really early on. Back when I was a kid, when I was really into UFOs, which I still am into UFOs, don't get me wrong, but I remember being really into like UFO investigations, and they said, always have a camera on you because you never know when you're going to see a UFO. You get a 1 in a million shot of one of these crafts. But I was young, and I didn't have any money to buy a camera. And I even thought back then, I go, wow, that'd be cool. And then I thought, I was probably like 12, 13 when I read that book. I go, that would be impractical. Because that would have been in 1988, so cameras were big. Unless you had, even like a Polaroid disposable camera didn't exist back then. I mean, they had the Polaroids with the ding, but it's like those little plastic disposable ones, they didn't exist when I was a kid. I remember going, that would be pretty impractical. You'd have to have one in your car. Back then, in the 80s, we would get around 10 to 12 good photographs of UFOs every year. Maybe. Nowadays, everyone has a cell phone in their pocket. Everyone has a camera on them at all times. A very high-quality camera. The new movie, 28 Days Later, the entire movie was shot on an iPhone. It hasn't come out yet, so maybe it looks terrible, but you can shoot a studio-quality film on these cameras. Everyone has a camera. We carry them with us at all times. We get about 10 to 12 UFO photos a year that are of quality and are not fake. Yeah, I find that very interesting. It could be the phenomenon itself is just hard to capture. That's definitely a theory that's been put out there. But this is what I was going to say. Black-eyed kids. I think it's very interesting that we had a rise of black-eyed kid stories. People saying I was at my house late at night and these kids came to the door and they were trying to get in and I almost was mesmerized to let them in. Why haven't any of these encounters been caught on a Ring doorbell camera? They're everywhere. And even if you don't have one, your neighbors might. I know where I live, there's cameras recording everything in this neighborhood. Everything. I know when I'm walking out to go to work, I do a little dance. I do a little dance to show off for the surveillance cameras. So there's surveillance cameras everywhere. I find that interesting. Black-eyed kid stories, because they always take place in suburban environments. Maybe a rural environment, a house, though. They don't really happen out in the middle of nowhere. There may be an encounter here or there, but for the most part, they're in a suburban neighborhood. You figure a camera would have picked up 2 kids walking up to a house, knocking on the door and seeing this interaction. But I don't know. I think a lot of black-eyed kid stories are fake. I don't think they're all fake by any means, but they're just easy to make up. All these stories are kind of easy to make up. Mimic stories, we're seeing a popular trend on them, but they always have no conclusion. It's always like, huh? And it's almost it's almost boring in a sense to make up. If you're going to make up a story, why would you make up this one? We're having a spate of mimic stories, and the question is, what is the phenomenon? My personal feeling on mimics, I don't know if I've really said this on the show, and mimics in the sense of someone seeing you walking around your house or you seeing someone else walk around the house. Not someone you don't know, but like a relative that you share a home with. You see them walk by and then a half hour later they come home and you're like, what? I thought you were already home. I swear I saw you walk into your bedroom. And she's like, no. I was out shopping the whole time. And I adopted these 2 kids, black-eyed children. Come in, feast on his fear. Ah! I think it has something to do with the multiverse. That's kind of my read on it. We've talked about it before. I think it has something to do with alternate realities. What you're seeing is the time when your mother came home a half hour earlier and she walked into the bedroom, and then she comes home in your main reality, she comes home right now. I find it super alarming if my theory is correct, and who knows, right? I'm not an expert at any of this at all. Myself, like you, just love exploring these topics. If it's a multiverse thing, and the stories are exponentially increasing, I mean, I'm finding so many mimic stories over the past couple years. I don't report on all of them because a lot of them are the same. I try to find the more unusual ones. But it's happening more and more and more and more and more that I wonder if the multiverse is malfunctioning. And that's why we're experiencing this more. And if it is the multiverse malfunctioning, that's not good. Is the increase in mimic stories actually a warning or foreshadowing the collapse of the multiverse? And even if it was, what could we do to fix it? Right? I'm stating a problem, I have no solution. But I do think that's an interesting thing to look at with these mimic stories. But again, this story, we don't even know if it's a true mimic story. There was definitely something making the mom's voice happen. Was it just an artifact of reality that was glitched out? Or was it an entity impersonating the mother to get Bruno to come out of the room? Possible, right? We don't know. The fact that the dad shows up at the ending is really what throws a wrench into the whole thing. It's not a straight mimic story. It's not a straight ghost story. We could be looking at a demonic issue. But what's interesting, he never had this happen again. And he did leave his room and go to where the voice was calling to him 3 times. So if something was trying to get him out of the room, it was successful 3 times. It led him to the bedroom 3 times, and still nothing happened. Very, very interesting story when you sit back and you kind of digest it. You can really just kind of dig your teeth into it, because at the end of the day, like I said maybe 15 minutes ago before I talked about all this other stuff, black-eyed kids and multiverse, we don't know what happened. He doesn't know what happened. But something happened, something that terrified him and confused him, broke his worldview so much that even now, years later, Nipple Muncher 42069 is perplexed and, still to this day, frightened that it may happen again. Charlotte Renee, let's go ahead and toss you the keys to the world-famous Carpenter Copter. We are leaving behind this neighborhood. Why don't you fly us all the way out to the Soviet Union? We're in the Soviet Union. The year is 1942. We're in the town of Krivoshzekovo. Don't bother looking that up. Don't bother looking that up. It was a real town at the time. I probably just mispronounced it. Nowadays, it's part of modern-day Novosibirsk. It's 1942. There's a military factory there. They're producing all sorts of products for the war. And at this factory, there's a young girl named Nelia, 15 years old. She works at this military plant as part of the war effort. Doing your part. Doing your part, right? Now, at this plant, there was a portion of it that was off limits to everybody, even the workers. If you worked there, you weren't allowed to go in this particular area, and everybody knew why. They didn't know exactly what was going on over there, but they knew why they couldn't go over there. The boss didn't make it a mystery. He's like, don't go down the spooky staircase. It's on cobwebs. And you have a skeleton, an electric skeleton going, oh! No, he's like, don't go over there. They're developing secret weapons. And they're secret. So if you go over there, they'll probably kill you. Because they'll think you're a spy or something like that. This part of the plant was called the Aerodome, where they worked on advanced aircraft. But whenever you tell someone you can't go over there, especially a young person, they may have said, I don't want to go over there anyways. So you can keep your secret aircraft and your military-trained snipers to prevent all spying. You can shove it. I didn't want to go over there anyways. And they turn around, little teardrop. If you tell someone you can't go over there, they're more likely to go over there. If you're walking down a hallway and there's a door that says, do not enter, tell me you have not touched that doorknob. I do. Right? People hate it when I do it, when I'm out with other people. They're like, Jason, don't go in there. I was like, I don't know. Adventure awaits. As a military-trained sniper is blowing my brains out. One night, she is able to sneak over there. It was too much of a temptation. She was told not to go over there. She's young. She's dumb. I mean, she's probably smarter than me. She did work at a military factory. But, she's just not thinking clearly. The opportunity arises for her to sneak over there. And she knows that they're working on advanced aircraft. What is that, like a plane with 4 wings? Maybe it's a plane. I don't know. Maybe it's a plane with 10 propellers. Who knows? She's curious, though. But when she gets over there, she doesn't see the type of experimental aircraft she thought she would see. Instead, she sees, in this secret area that no one's supposed to go to, a large disc-shaped object that's landed on the ground, emitting a bluish light. It's 1942. It's the Soviet Union. Even in America, the term flying saucer, it wasn't even invented yet. A disc-shaped vehicle hadn't entered the popular consciousness. You wouldn't even think UFO. And considering it's in an experimental aircraft facility, she probably thought this was something the Soviets had designed. She'd just never seen anything like it. And that is when a man walks directly over towards her. Nalia, while she knows she's not supposed to be over here, while she knows that she's seen something that's supposed to be top secret, when she sees the man walking towards her, she's not immediately alarmed by him. There's something about him that seems non-confrontational, you might say. She just didn't get the feeling that she had to book it and run. She also got the feeling that the person she was looking at may not be a person at all. This guy walks up, and he has a large head, huge black eyes. Black-eyed kid? Maybe this is the grandpa. Maybe this is where it all started. He stood 5 feet tall, had wrinkled grayish skin, and was wearing a black, tight overall. It sounds almost like she's describing a gray alien, although it does seem to have more human features than we see in a traditional gray alien. But again, in 1942, who knew what these things looked like? Even the term gray alien, that really didn't hit the popular consciousness until the book Communion in the early 80s. He walks over to her, and again, she doesn't feel threatened by this guy at all. In fact, the very first thing she asks him, because she realizes that he's not human, or wholly human, she asks him, "Are you Lilliputian?" In reference to Gulliver's Travels, the Lilliputian, the tiny people. That might, some people might take that as an insult, right? Generally don't talk about people's height, whether it's short or tall, the first time you meet them. And again, she's 15 years old, she's not thinking. Plus, he's not human, right? He may not have the same feelings. He turns a little tear, rolls down his cheek. He turns back, he goes, these are actual quotes. She's told this story later in life. He turned to her and he said, "We are all the same." At that moment, a thought pops in her head, and she realizes, oh, this guy's not only not human, he's from another planet. And the second she thinks that, the alien looks at her and goes, "How did you know that? How did you know that I'm not from Earth?" So he definitely has a telepathic connection. He can read her mind at the very least. And he read that when she came to that conclusion that he's not from this planet. What happens next, we see in a lot of UFO stories where the two people involved will converse. And they'll say, we talked about stuff for 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is, but they don't remember what they talked about. We see this as a very common thing in UFO stories, and it's funny to us, people who'd be like, "Oh my gosh, you talked to an alien?" Like, I would remember everything we talked about. As they're removing my organs, I was like, "Oh, how does my heart work?" Because I had an x-ray recently, and they noticed something. But in the reality of it, I don't know if it's part of the mind warping thing. I don't know if it's part of the brain trying to process the fact that you're talking to someone from an alien planet, which is supposed to be impossible. I don't know what it is, but it's very common in UFO stories that they will have long conversations, and when the person, the human who had this encounter tells a story, they'll go, "Yeah, we talked for like 30 minutes, but I don't remember what we talked about." There was a story a long time ago about, I think if I remember correctly, it was a philosopher who had a conversation with 2 or 3 aliens in his house, and they talked until the sun came up. And they go, what'd you talk about? And he goes, oh, we talked about, like, philosophy stuff, like God and life and the universe. And they're like, oh, what did the aliens have to say about that? And he's like, I don't remember. So it's like he gave it to a philosopher talking about his favorite subject, talking about it for hours on end. He couldn't come up with a lot of specifics. I think he just remembered a few out of hours and hours of conversation. He just remembered a few. Anyways, this conversation doesn't go on all night. They talk very briefly. But what's interesting is that at a certain point, the alien says this. I'm going to read this directly. I'm tempted to do a little alien voice. Hello, please. But it's such a long quote, we're not going to worry about it. So anyways, quote, you bear in mind that your country will win this war. Which must have been something weighing heavily on Nalia for multiple reasons. We'll get to that in a second. But you bear in mind that your country will win this war. We will share our technologies with your government. And as far as about you, bear in mind that your brain is very developed. If you want, fly with us. Unquote. It's reassuring, right, to Nalia that her country will win this war. Very brutal war is going on at this point 3 years, basically. Russia wasn't involved. Russia was actually allied with the Nazis in the beginning, so they didn't care about the first couple of years. But anyways, now that they're getting invaded, now they have to stop evil. Before, they just didn't care. They were part of the bad guys. Nalia's like, okay, well, that's good, because I know how brutal this war is. Also, Nalia has 5 brothers who are currently out in the war zone. She has 5 brothers who are currently serving combat roles in the Soviet military. So knowing that the war is going to end and they will be the victors is reassuring for that reason as well. So we have that. Now, Nalia, who would want to turn down a trip on a UFO? You'd be hard-pressed to find people who wouldn't be like, when do we go? When we headed out? Let's go. They're like, actually, if you're going to be that annoying, you're going to stay on Earth. A lot of people would love to take a trip on a UFO. What's interesting is the reason why most of us wouldn't is Nalia's reason. She goes, well, my mother would miss me, and my brothers would miss me. Like, I can't go with you, because they're not talking about coming back. I can't go with you because I have people who will miss me. I would love to personally fly around on a UFO, but I'd have people who would miss me. I feel kind of bad because if someone's like, oh, no one misses me, no one will miss me, UFO, take me away. I'm kind of implying that if you don't want to go on a UFO adventure, no one will ever miss you. And that's not true. There will always be somebody who will miss you. But I realized that I was like, some guy's crying right now. He's like, oh, this podcast was supposed to cheer me up. Oh, no one will miss me when I'm abducted by the aliens. Oh, you're like, Jason, quit laughing about that. You're making that hypothetical guy feel even worse. He's like, oh, this is the worst thing that's happened since I vomited on my penis. Oh, boo. Blah, throws up. That's a reference to a past episode. Anyways, so, like if I disappeared on a galactic adventure, my family would miss me. That was Nalia's thing too. She goes, my mom will miss me, my brothers will miss me, I can't go. And that's when the alien says to Nalia, we will take your brothers. I know that 5 of your brothers are fighting on the front. And you wonder, okay, are you like saying you're going to go pick them up? And bring them back here? Like, we will take your brothers? Are they going to go on the adventure with me? Like, what are you implying here? Or you're going to abduct them? What does that mean? We will take your brothers. I know you have brothers fighting on the front. The alien, I don't know if Nalia even asks that question. Like, what does that mean? Is that some sort of veiled threat? I don't know if she asked that question or not, but the alien ended up giving Nalia this crystal and said, here's a gift to remember this moment. She's like, no, did you threaten my brothers? Are you threatening my family? She's all picking up a broom. He's like, this crystal will remind you of this moment where we threatened your family. Here, take this crystal. And they said, we will always be able to track the location of that crystal. So if you keep it, we will always know where you're at. Which again is that a veiled threat? You're like, wait a second, are you threatening me? I'll just leave the crystal somewhere else. I'll put it in the back of a pickup truck and let it drive away. The alien said, don't tell anyone about this, by the way. All this stuff, this secret vehicle you've seen, the fact that aliens exist, don't tell anyone about this. The encounter ends. I don't know if Nalia leaves first or if the alien walks away. I don't know if there's this awkward silence where they're just kind of staring at each other. And the alien's like, you're supposed to leave now. Encounter over. Transmission end. And she's like, what? This is a transmission? We're face to face. He's like, this is awkward. Anyways, the encounter did end. Nalia, for her credit, ended up joining the KGB. The aforementioned Soviet secret police. She joined the KGB and went on with her life, which actually, if you figure, would kind of give you a leg up the whole Secret Service. You're like, oh, I know a secret. They're like, what is it? Nalia, tell us. She's like, I know the best secret of all. That makes me the best member of the secret police, as she's stepping on some peasant's head, collapsing their jaw with her boot. The KGB is so brutal. Well, anyways, she ends up joining the KGB. Her 5 brothers, though, who were fighting on the front, never returned from the battlefield. They weren't killed in combat. They were missing in action. Interesting UFO story. It's actually been a long time since we've covered a UFO story. I kind of want to start getting into these again. It's been a while. I got this from ThinkAboutItDocs.com. Let me give you some sourcing for this. I got it from ThinkAboutItDocs.com. They got it from an author named Igor V. Kolomets. It was published in a magazine called The Secret Doctrine, and the article was called Aliens Were Helping USSR. This was published back in 2003. So this was a story that Nalia told much later in life. She didn't reveal it for the longest time. But what I think is interesting about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys know a lot about a lot of different things. I did a little bit of research into this. But let's take, and I'll try to talk about this as briefly as possible, because it's definitely its own topic. Think about all of the stories that you've heard involving World War II and UFOs. So just off the top of my head, we have the Foo Fighters. We had US and I think British pilots. It might have even been mostly British pilots, now that I think about it. Seeing these orbs of light flying around their plane. They weren't friendly in the sense that they thought they were Allied vehicles. So you would assume that they were of Nazi origin. We have stories of the Nazis working with aliens. Stories of the Nazis finding a hidden base in Antarctica where they come across alien technology. We have stories and photos. I mean, most of the photos, I believe, are fake, of Nazi saucers. I mean, you're like, Jason, those were obviously fake. The Nazis did not have flying saucers. But, you know, I'm sure they were working on all sorts of crazy stuff. They obviously were. You know, rockets. Things we take for granted now. Things you can go buy at a hobby shop. It was top-of-the-line technology back then. And the Nazis were crafting them, creating these things. Rockets and jet engines and all of this stuff. But the idea of the Nazis working closely or being contacted by aliens, finding alien technology, being given alien technology, these are all pretty common World War II, paranormal World War II stories. And I don't think there's a lot of well-known, well-discussed alien stories involving the Allies. I've seen a little bit, like when I was looking into the story, I saw a little bit about FDR possibly meeting with aliens. The thing is that most of the articles I was seeing about like, oh, illegal aliens or the Alien Spying Act or whatever. And that term was just meant to use people outside of America trying to come in, or people living in America were subject to the Alien Espionage Act, and so on and so forth. As far as I know, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know everything, but as far as I know, there's not any big UFO stories involving the Allies. It's usually the Allies fighting Nazi technology that is alien of origin. And here we have a story where the aliens are like, again, it's in 1942. At this point, Nazi Germany had invaded Russia. But they invaded in 1941. Before then, they had a non-aggression pact. Germany and the Soviet Union had a non-aggression pact. And so they're like, okay, we won't attack each other. Fingers crossed, right? Oh, yeah, you know? So this is where kind of what I'm getting at. Why did the aliens have such a boner for Nazi Germany? I mean, think about it for a second. There's not stories of Nazis blowing up UFOs and stealing them, or of them taking alien bodies and dissecting them, or vivisecting those ones that are still alive. No, it's pictures and stories. Mostly stories, not a lot of photos, but mostly stories of Nazis in UFOs. The Nazis using the state-of-the-art technology. And then simplifying it in such a way to create a rocket or a jet engine so it could be crafted here on Earth. But using... This is what I find interesting, too. Is that, again, you guys can probably, some of you guys may know this off the top of your head. Some of you guys might be military generals. You're like, oh, I know how that worked. I know very famously there was Project Paperclip, and that was the idea that after the fall of the Axis, after Germany was defeated, there was a race between America and the Soviet Union to take Nazi scientists into their country. And it basically came down to what side of the Iron Curtain you were on. If you were in East Germany, I mean, good luck. It's going to be a long time before you can get out. You now were a scientist working for the Soviet Union. If you were in Western Europe, I mean, the people who gave you orders, like the generals who told the scientists what to do, they were being taken to Nuremberg to be put on trial. But the scientists are being put on a plane, flown to the United States, where they are going to get paid very well. They're not prisoners working against their will. They're going to get paid very well and be put up in a very fancy lifestyle to help create the United States space program and their rocket program, their jet engine program. Here's my question. Is there any precedent for that? In World War I, was there a big push to take scientists from Austria-Hungary, where there's a big push to take scientists of the 1920s, 1917 era Germany and ship them to America? Has it happened since? Now, I understand you might have like high-level businessmen in, say, South Vietnam, that you're flying out because they've supported the U.S. military, the U.S. regime, the French regime, all of that, during the Vietnam conflict. And as the North Vietnamese were pouring over the border, you got out your allies. That's not what I'm talking about. Project Paperclip was purposely finding people who, until the end of the war, were supporting Germany. And then you go, we need what you know. We need what you know so much. We will forget all of the things you've done, all the things you've supported. Because it might just be the guy, he's like, dude, I'm just a scientist who studies rockets. Like, I'm just an egghead. But remember, those rockets were being launched into other countries and killing innocent people. And the U.S. government goes, well, okay, fine, just don't say anything, right? Don't talk, because people tell you're German, you got the accent. And get on this plane. We're going to set you up for life. Has that ever happened before or since? I'm not talking about allies. I'm not talking about spies. I'm talking about taking people from the regime that you are fighting, that you have now destroyed, people who have oiled that machine and helped build weapons of war. You then take them and treat them nicely. You don't take them prisoner. You don't force them. You take them, you treat them nicely because you want those brains. You want that information. Now, you could say, Jason, no, that actually happens during every war. After Iraq fell, they pulled Iraq's greatest mathematicians out, shipped them over to America, gave them a nice house, a new name, a great job. Maybe it does happen after every war. Again, I'm not talking about allies or people who assisted with the war effort on our behalf. Because if it only happened once, and it only happened during the war, which I think you could make the statement that World War II was the war where aliens seemed to play the most active part in modern times. I mean, sure, back in Bible times, you could have had some sort of alien craft to show up at just the right moment, and it seems like an omen, and it causes the battle to turn, and the enemy is just wiped out. Like, if everyone's distracted, you're ancient Assyria, and there's this huge war going on, and all of a sudden this disc shows up, and everyone's distracted, and it allows the defenders to rally for one more push out, and they're able to rout the forces that have been besieging them for weeks. I mean, you could argue, obviously, the aliens interfered in that. But if aliens are actually having bright lights flying around allied crafts to distract them, to confuse them, if the aliens are actually giving technology to the Russians, I mean, if the aliens are actively giving technology, trading information with the Nazis, then they're obviously playing a huge part in that war. And what's interesting is we do not see a lot of stories, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I've just missed them, but stories of Winston Churchill talking to a gray alien. Winston Churchill giving a tour of a UFO. Remember, in America, the story of the UFO, of the flying saucer, was not until after World War II. It was all the way up into 1947 when we had the first modern American UFO sighting. I know there's been stuff seen with airships and lights in the sky and stuff like that. But Kenneth Arnold, in his plane, seeing and coining the term flying saucer. He said they skipped like saucers, technically, but anyways. We've talked about that before. Flying saucer came out of the news. But it wasn't until after World War II that we start seeing America have these issues. And you had 1947 Kenneth Arnold. That was on June 24th. The next month, July 8th, 1947, was the Roswell crash. Or the day it was announced in the newspaper. It had happened 2 weeks previous to that. Why are the aliens? I mean, here's the thing, man. Shouldn't that kind of color the way that we look at aliens? I know a lot of people want to think of them as space brothers and they're here to expand human consciousness. But I mean, come on, man. I get it. There's moral relativism. I understand there's a lot of different ways you can look at the world. But if you were an alien and you were watching the world from the late 30s to the early 40s, even if you didn't know anything about Hitlerian philosophies, even if you didn't know anything about the Holocaust, even if you didn't know anything about racial purity and that every race should live separately. I'm not saying that very clearly. Like, that's a clip. Nope, I'm not saying that. I'm saying even if you're an alien and you were watching this, just by watching what was going on, you'd be like, oh, I see expansion. I see this country all of a sudden going into other countries and taking over. And then I see this country over here, Japan, taking over China and going into the Philippines. Like, even if you didn't know, it's like watching ants. If you're that far removed and you see ants kind of living relatively harmoniously, that might be the wrong word, but you have 10 ant tribes in a football field sized area. And then all of a sudden you see one ant colony begin to overtake and kill a nearby colony. And once they've subdued that colony, they've killed all the warriors, they've killed all the important ones, they've taken the queen slave. And then you see them move on to another colony and another one. You would start to go, this is a very aggressive group of ants. This ant colony, not only is it aggressive, it seems unstoppable. Like it's just going from colony to colony. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know if the other ants pissed off this first ant colony. I don't know if this first ant colony feels that it has a moral crusade. They say, we have to rule this football field. There can only be one colony under our control. Otherwise, it's just anarchy. I don't know. We would never know, right? We don't speak ant. But we could look at that and we go, that ant colony right there is incredibly aggressive. And they're going out of their way to kill other ants. Ants that are far away. Ants that aren't bugging them. Watch. And we watch them go this great distance and attack that colony and subdue them and control them, take them over. They've expanded. They've become a super colony. Even if you didn't know why they were doing it, you knew what they were doing. Super aggressive, violent expansion. So the alien just watching that should have been alarmed, even if he didn't know why. Because he's seeing this massive aggression going on where they're invading these other colonies, these other countries. So for the aliens to go, those are the guys we want to deal with. Those are the guys that we want to contact. Those are the guys we want to help with technology. Those are the guys that we want to show our secret base to in Antarctica. Just removing any knowledge of the Axis powers and what their goals were for the world is very odd. And you would think that anyone who aligned themselves with such an expansionist empire must they themselves be expansionists. But you also got to remember, though, aliens, they know what's going on. They do speak English. They can read. They're telepathic. So the fact that they were aligning themselves with Nazi Germany, when they did know all of Hitler's policies, they knew about the Holocaust, they knew about the end goal of the Axis powers, which was to have racial segregation throughout the world. Forced, right? If you didn't want to leave, you're forced out. At best. Cleansed at worst. This idea of this very structured society where if you were this particular race, you lived in this particular part of the world. The aliens would have known all that. So it's not like they just watched a country invade other countries and said, here, have our technology. They knew what the end goal was. And they still, if the stories are true, still gave the Nazis the technology. But Chico Jason, this story is aliens giving the technology to the Russians. I'm assuming, too, I'm making an assumption, that those aliens had been working with the Soviet Union before the Nazis invaded. I don't think they came down post the Soviet Union, Germany going to war. Because the story takes place in 1942. They invaded in 1941. It hadn't been that long. The reason why I think that is, again, we don't have stories of U.S. soldiers having a UFO at an airstrip and little dudes walking around and telling them stuff telepathically. We have no stories about that. We have stories about that involving the Nazis. We have one story about that involving the Soviets a year after Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. But the aliens, I mean, like, let's call a spade a spade. The aliens were supporting Nazis. There's just way too many stories to back that up. There's just way too many stories to ignore the fact these gray aliens, these people who are supposedly more enlightened than we are, when they looked at the state of the world in the 1930s and 1940s, they chose to stand behind Nazi Germany. And I think, like, again, my theory that Project Paperclip hadn't happened really before or since was the fact that the U.S. government realized that the scientists in Nazi Germany, they weren't just building jets and rockets. They had access to alien technology, to alien knowledge. In fact, you may even have a situation where sometimes these guys might be, this is total conjecture, obviously, but if you have there's a Nazi scientist who has been working closely with gray aliens to develop technology that, while it's not as perfect as the alien technology because we're using tools and things from Earth to make it, a jet engine is nowhere near as useful as a anti-gravity vehicle, but I mean, it's better than a propeller plane. You take the human who has the alien technology in his noggin, you take the human who has helped build technology on Earth that is far more advanced than what America had, and that same scientist you're taking also has had one-on-one contact with a particular representative of the gray aliens. So you take him, you're also taking that contact. People do it in the business world all the time. I may not be the best stockbroker, but the fact that I have Warren Buffett's phone number and that I went to his summer house last year, do you think a company's not going to hire me over that other guy who's a better stockbroker but who has no contacts? Who's going to get that job? Because you get me, you get my phone. Not literally, right? I'm still going to hold on to it, but you get me. I can call up Warren Buffett. Super weird. I mean, really, I didn't think about it until I was really looking into this story, honestly. I mean, listen, man, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of chaos, a lot of sides. And I know America wasn't immune to any of that. The Dresden firebombing was absolutely horrific. The dropping the atomic bombs on civilian populations, absolutely horrific. I understand at the point, the military says things like, we got to do this, it'll end the war quicker. We got to do this, we got to do this. Still horrific. Dresden firebombing. I'm not excusing America. America did some crazy, horrible things in the war as well. But if you gotta pick a side, right? If you're an alien and you're floating around and you're watching all of this and you do know what's going on, it's not like us looking at ants and not knowing why. The aliens clearly know what people's goals are and what they plan on doing and how they're going to do it. And out of everything that was going on in that globe, they chose to assist the Nazis. Are there a lot of stories of UFOs interacting with the Japanese military? Or the Italian military? It always seems to be Nazi Germany. Now, whether or not they discovered some sort of technology or they discovered something in Antarctica, they made first contact with the gray aliens, and that's why the aliens seem to be working with the Nazis during this war. At a certain point, the aliens would have to realize what was going on. You can get swindled for a bit. The first person you meet is like, hey, nice to meet you. Welcome. Come to my house. I got like beer and strudel and stuff like that. You're hanging out. Seems like a good guy. But after you see just millions of soldiers march into another country, you're like, oh, I thought we were just hanging out. You're all sitting in your UFO. General's like, oh, no, we were going to do this, man. This is hanging out. This is how we hang out these days. They knowingly assisted the Nazis for years. So much so that when the war ended, the America wanted that information so badly, they bent over backwards to get it. They took people who they're fighting on Tuesday. They were friends with them on Wednesday, and by Thursday, those same scientists who previously were building weapons that were killing U.S. soldiers, they were on a plane to the United States. It's a crazy story. I mean, really, I think you just got to sit back sometimes and think, like, what are the gray aliens' agenda, really? If they were willing to back the Nazis and they wanted this racially purified, segregated society, and now they're saying, nah, dude, we're just space brothers. Love, peace, and chicken grease, dude. Like, elevate your soul. I mean, you know, I don't know how much I trust them is what I'm saying. I don't know how much I trust them. And I wonder if this guy was just hanging out. And again, he's like, oh, damn it. Like, he was on the Nazi thing and he was flying over to the Soviet Union. He's like, oh, these guys are have a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. I think I'll just hang out here and help them. And then once they invaded, he's like, damn it. He's like, now what do? I guess I got to assist these guys for a bit. But again, not a lot of stories about aliens working with the Soviet Union. Not a lot of stories of aliens working with Imperial Japan, or Mussolini, or FDR, or Churchill. So you really got to think, what are the true intentions of the gray aliens? We don't know, but sometimes you can make a good guess based on someone's past associations. Sometimes that gives you an idea of who they truly are and what their purpose is here on Earth. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be your email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today.